think I'm going to learn and try some new talents. They say I should try to add humor to my podcast, so I'm learning the art of telling jokes. So, here we go. Why did they predict that the chicken would cross the road, and what was the distribution of his path? Let's get to it. Welcome. Another great episode of IBF On Demand. I'm your humorous, informative, adventurous, and not so humble host, Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Thanks for the follows. Thanks for the subscribes. You can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, Discord, whatever you want to do. Find me there. Continue to follow, subscribe, send it to your friends. Your grandmother, she may like it as well. We do have a sponsor, Arkiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. Thank them for being on board. I do want to mention IBF has some events coming up. We have a Predictive Analytics Conference coming up April 26th through the 28th. This by far is one of our fastest growing and trending conferences, so I wanted to make sure you're aware of it. You have time to register right now, ibf.org. Go to the events page. A lot of what we're talking about recently, when we're talking about machine learning, data, structure, and being able to, where we're going as a field, this is one of the premier conferences that really deals and focuses on that. It's going to be in New Orleans, live event in person, April 26th through the 28th. So check that out. It's going to be a great conference. I'm actually going to be there as well. We're talking about predictive analytics, machine learning. I understand it can be intimidating for some people. It doesn't need to be intimidating. Invite you, come out to the conference. The conference is for all levels. You can, no matter where you are, you're going to feel comfortable at a predictive analytics conference or one of our conferences. And hopefully you understand this stuff is not scary. I love to, see people leap into it and take this journey. I'm getting feedback from people all the time, sending me emails, eric@ibf.org, saying, hey, I got your book. I'm trying this out, or whether they've gotten introduced to machine learning and taking the concepts of what we've been doing for years and applying them in a new way and learning some new skills. It's great when I see people taking that journey. As I mentioned, my book, check it out, Predictive Analytics for Business Forecasting. It really works on the fundamentals, the concepts, and demystifying. It's not a complicated college textbooks, even though there are some universities utilizing it. It's not a complicated textbook. It demystifies really what we're talking about with neural networks and data into language and understanding from a fundamentals that we come from in business forecasting and planning. So it really takes it to demand planning 2.0. So the reason also that I've been doing these type of podcasts is the reason I had past podcasts with Eric Siegel or Nicholas Vanderpoot, people who are experts in data science and machine learning and what they do, predictive analytics, and bringing them on to explain things in simple terms. So go back and check out some of those podcasts if you want another point of view. Well, today I have another wonderful guest I've stumbled on. Looking up, because I'm continually learning myself, trying to understand some concepts so even I can understand it. I stumbled upon this person's podcast, this person's YouTube channel, and it was an amazing opportunity to hear things in very simple terms. Mariya is a computer science student from Vancouver, and she actually runs her own Python-dedicated YouTube channel. She was self-taught programmer for many years. She actually started when she was the age of 12. Her dream, much like my own, is to make machine learning approachable for everyone and spread the word of Python in the process. She's a programmer, a YouTuber, an AI enthusiast, a Pythoneer. She films simple tutorials on Python for beginners. Check out her YouTube channel, Python Simplified, on YouTube to learn about neural networks, bots, GUIs, and much more. So please help me welcome Mariya. Welcome, Mariya.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for having me. It's my first
I'm
ever
ex-
interview.
First ever interview? No way. It is?
Yes.
Wow. Well,
So thank you.
I'm excited and blessed to have you be on my show because I actually stumbled upon your channel, and I mean you got a lot more viewers than I ever get, but I can understand why. There's some great content on there, and I'm hoping my audience actually checks it out as well, and you get a few more views as well because there's some great stuff you have out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. I try to do my best. I'm still a student. I'm learning. I'm getting better in what I do. But it's so far I've been able to help so many other students and so many other people, and it's very fulfilling.
Yeah. As I said, we share the same mission, and we're kind of like demystifying, these Python, machine learning, coding, kind of trying to demystify some of those things. And you do it very well. And I said it helps out the students. It helps out people getting into the field. And that's really what I wanted this podcast to be about was we got a lot of people that are not students that maybe are close even to my age out there that are getting into it and want to start doing some coding, but are scared
Yes.
and I really wanted to take this podcast to give them that encouragement. So with that, my first question to you would be where do they begin the journey? Python's something new to them. Where do they begin this journey?
I think that the best way to begin is to take an introductory course. There are many different platforms that offer it. Udacity, Udemy, IDX, Coursera. They have free courses mostly, and they're very short courses. And I took one of these. I've learned uh, the most basic commands, the most basic syntax of Python, and then you can expand further. So as long as you have a basic understanding of functions, of loops, of things that every other programming language basically has, control flow operations. You can then move on and expand it to different libraries because there's lots of support in Python.
So you mentioned like loops and some of the structure, some of the language aspects of it. If someone, I mean, might be Excel VB codes type situation. That's my early days, understanding how to do some VB A in Excel. Is it similar to what we're talking about as far as just the structure, learning the language, learning kind of the logic behind it? Is that really what we're talking about then?
In terms of anything that has to do with Excel, it translates directly into Pandas, which is a data science library that is widely used in Python. And I believe that a lot of things that you encounter in other languages, you can apply them with Python as well, regardless of the language. The biggest difference is that Python is very high level. You don't need to consider the small detail. You don't need to think about the data types you're declaring. Python takes care of the most part of your program. It's things that I'm not quite familiar with the Excel
Yeah.
examples. I don't come from that world. But if you compare it to a language like C++, which is very low level,
Okay.
it requires every little detail. So Python is much more get to the chase.
Yeah.
Get it done fast, and think about the important things. And that's why I like it so much. And
Yeah.
I think
And
that
even if, oh, go ahead. Sorry. No, please.
I just think that if people try to build a single application in Python, even if they just build something saying hello world, they will see the difference. And it just try it. That's the best way to know.
Yeah. Yeah, and you answered the question exactly correctly. I am familiar like VBA and Excel and everything, and actually Python's easier. So it is the fundamentals, and that's what you talked about. It's the fundamentals. C++, no matter what it is, it's the fundamentals of the language, and Python is just another structure, and it's actually a lot of times for people easier type of structure to be able to utilize then as well. So what are some key things that someone getting into it, and if giving the advice to the newbie, what's some of the key things to know? Is it the data types? Is it the structures? What's some tricks? What do they need to know getting started to make sure that it's an easier transition for them?
Absolutely. So you begin with the data types. These are the building blocks of your application. You always need to know what data type to use in which relation because they have different methods. So strings, they have different methods from integers. floating point numbers as well. So every different data type, you can do all kinds of different operations to it. So the keynote, the beginning, is to know exactly which operations you can do on whichever data. Once you are comfortable with that, you can then move on with control flow. Once you're such as if statements, conditional statements, functions, for loops, things of that sort. And once you're comfortable with that, you move to classes and object-oriented programming, which is also doable in Python. Actually, everything is an object in Python. That's part of why this language is so brilliant. Um, and yeah, you move on basically. And I believe that once you get comfortable with object-oriented programming, that's where you can actually spread your wings and start looking for whatever you find interesting. So if you're interested in ML, you start looking for machine learning frameworks and libraries. If you're interested in data science, you definitely dive much deeper into pandas. If you're interested in math, that's probably a NumPy situation. So there's plenty of libraries that can accommodate you as long as you know the basics. That's
Okay.
important.
You mentioned object oriented. I mean, for some of the audience, can you explain what you mean by that?
So whenever you're working with objects, you basically take combine the data along with the functionality of the data. So basically, if you have, for instance, if you have a windmill class, this windmill will have a special color, it will have a speed, it will have height and width. So this is the data about the windmill, and that's usually combined with the functionality of the windmill, which is spinning. And yeah, so you would have a function to the windmill that is called spin. There's going to be another function called stop. And you combine them all into a single object, which is a windmill. I hope I explained it well.
No, no, and I think even in your examples, you were talking about taking the child to the zoo and pointing out goats or something. I think was a great example. I think you gave in one of your podcast and one of your videos as well. So yeah, I think it's a good example. You
Awesome.
talked about libraries, and you mentioned all these different libraries. That can be something that's overwhelming or a point that's unsure for people getting into this as well. So when you're talking about libraries, what is a library? Let's just start off with the easy one. What is a library?
So basically that it's ready blocks of code that somebody else created for you, and then you can just use them. So let's take, for example, a softmax function, which is an algorithm we use in machine learning. It's a simple formula, but instead of writing 1 plus e plus something divided by m, you actually pre-code it. You actually make sure that you have it ready, and then instead of writing the entire formula, you write the word softmax. So when it comes to libraries, somebody already took care of that for you. So they took the hardest part of your code and they summarized it into a single method or into a single command. And then you can use it for specific purposes. So for example, NumPy is a library that's dealing with mathematical operations. So in order to do a square root, you type square root. And inside a set of round brackets, you specify very minimal parameters to make everything work. So libraries basically make your you don't have to do everything from scratch when you use a library.
So
That's
when
the
you have
biggest note.
so when you have the library, it's already defined the operations, it defined a name, and then all you do is call out that name to do that operations. Then, is in essence, is what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. And every
So
library has,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead. Every
every
library has
library
what?
has incredible documentation. Usually whichever libraries I encounter in Python, they have lots of support. They have forums. They have big communities that, in case you have any questions, in case something doesn't work, one of the methods fails, you usually open an issue on GitHub and somebody helps you out right away.
So what's some of the most common libraries you think people are going to need to know about?
Absolutely, NumPy and Pandas, they're a must. You cannot get away with them, as well as Matplotlib. So NumPy again is for mathematics, Pandas is for data science, Matplotlib is for plotting graphs and charts, sometimes even images. Depends on what you do. These would be the three main libraries that all of us almost are using. On top of that, there are plenty libraries that relate to what topic of interest you have. So for example, if you like creating applications for your desktop, That would be Kiwi, that would be Skinter, that would be PyQt5. It's different GUI interface. Sorry, it's different GUI libraries basically. If you're interested in ML, in artificial intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
you would probably go for PyTorch, which is my favorite, or you can go for TensorFlow. It all depends on what your heart desires. If you're into web scraping, if you'd like to automate processes on the web, you'd probably go for Selenium. It's a very powerful library. Mechanical soup, beautiful soup. So I think it's more about researching what you find interesting. So, for example, if you'd like to work with PDFs, you type PDF library for Python on Google, and then you find a few of the results. You take a look, you see how many commits there are in the GitHub repository, how many issues were solved and closed, and you determine how much support a certain library has. And once you have determined the library with the most support, I would probably go for this one.
So you've already answered the next question, is, which is,
Oh,
by the way, I'd add one more uh, um library to it. It'd be Dart for time series type modeling, because I know a lot of the audience, you still have internal data, you still have time series data you're trying to model. Dart's a great library for that then as well. So I think you've already answered my next question. Then is like we talked about all these libraries. You talked about general what each library is for. How do we choose and really find the libraries? It's simple. Just, hey, Google it. You're going to find the library. You're going to find the documentation. You're going to find the support for it, and this may work best for you. And some of this is trial and error. Is that right?
absolutely, absolutely. I tried many libraries that I was 100% sure that this is the best library in the world. And then you try another one and you try another one and you get surprised all the time. Even when it comes to things like pandas, I feel like I'm very proficient with pandas, but every time I film a tutorial on it, I have some viewers in the comments suggesting me a better way to do it. I didn't know pandas was so powerful, but every time I learn new things and it's amazing. And if you chose a certain library, it didn't work the same way you expected. It's not as pretty, it's not as fast, it's not as nice. You can always go for a different one. That's the beauty of programming. There's so many different opportunities, there's so many different libraries to choose from. You don't need to limit yourself in any shape or form. So definitely try.
And you mentioned the community. I mean, you'll get a ton of comments saying, "Hey, have you thought about this?" And even inside some of these, there's these communities, support communities, that are just overwhelmingly wanting to help you when you have a problem. That's one of the best things I think with these open source type of languages is the community support for it.
Absolutely. Every question you had, I rest assure you somebody else has already asked it a while ago, so you don't have to ask it again. But if you do, there's enough people that are there to help you. And I think that a lot of us programmers, we're trying to help the next generation of programmers. We're kind of trying to convince more people to join our community because we strongly believe in what we do. I think that the future and the present, it's all about computer science, and we're just developing in it, and it's growing and getting bigger. Now in high school, they study programming. I find it amazing. And yeah, I think that the more of us are joining this community, the more people feel the need to help others because they got helped first. They got helped when they started, right? So you kind of trying to spread it further, spread the love, spread the help. I have people joining my Discord server. They completely volunteer. They're working for really nice companies, like they're working for Meta. They're working for established high tech businesses, and yet they find the time to sit down with people who just started their Python journey and to explain them details, uh, basic details about functions, about for loops. And I find it absolutely amazing. They're volunteering and they're willing to do it. That's incredible.
That's it. I agree. We're paying it forward, and that's what you do on your YouTube channels. What I'm trying to do as well, my book and my channels and conferences that we do, trying to pay it forward to kind of raise the community as a whole, because we understand this is where we're going as an industry and field as well. So,
Absolutely.
so we mentioned how to get into it. We mentioned kind of the libraries, the tricks. Trial and error. We talked about that as just getting your hands dirty. Let's talk about that a little bit because I don't know if we fully did that justice. Because I think that's the biggest lesson that I learned going through it, and what I hear back from other people. It's just starting, just getting your hands dirty. You mentioned doing a little code, hello world. Just start something. Trial and error, I think, is the biggest lesson. Not afraid to make the mistakes and getting into it, I think, is one of the biggest encouragements that I would give someone. I mean, would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. I think that making mistakes is crucial. You're not going to learn anything if you don't make mistakes and you try to improve from it. Um, you'd be surprised how much, when I look back at my code when I first started the channel, I could have made it so much nicer. I could have, you just learn along the way. You get different, you end up establishing your favorite libraries as you go. But before you tried all of them, you cannot really know for sure what's the best way to do and what to recommend to people. Because I get questions all the time, Mariya, what is the best library for this? What is the best library for that? You know what? I can tell you what's my favorite library, but I cannot tell you what's the best library. It's something you have to try. And it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Usually you start with a goal. So what I usually recommend to people who don't know what kind of applications to start with is think of a game. Think of a game you played as a child, like a game of checkers, maybe trivia, maybe Sudoku, and try to implement it because we all know the rules really well. We're familiar with that. We played it a very long time. So try to implement it. And you don't have to start with a GUI application. You don't have to have a fancy interface. Just try to implement the basic functionality and see how it looks like. So usually whatever I do is a build up. You start with the most basic functionality you have, and then you expand it further. Because if you try building the next best thing from the get-go, you're not going to get there.
So we want people to get started, make mistakes. That's how we're going to learn. Now, at the same time, maybe they can learn from some of our mistakes. I'm sure I've made
Well,
quite a few more than what you've made, but I'm sure you have a few bits of advice of things you wish you could do different or kind of things to watch out for when you're getting involved in coding. What are some of the biggest pitfalls, mistakes you think new users will make and kind of to watch out for?
I think that listening to too much advices, it's not always the best advice. Because
So
I
you're
have
saying they
people,
shouldn't watch this podcast then? Is that what?
no, they should watch podcasts, but I think they should try and decide for this themselves because I've seen a lot of people recommending things. Do not do this ever. Do not. And it, it's not a law. It's not a rule. You know, it's something that that particular YouTube guru finds repulsive, right? But it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. For example, recursion. Usually recursion is not the most efficient it's not the most efficient process to use in your application when it comes to Python at least. But people are still doing that and there's still beauty in it. There's a certain elegancy when you see this type of code. And I don't think that one person gets to decide for the entire planet how their code should be. Um, and and very often people can bring new ideas to the table. We've been in the programming industry has been here for a while, but it's always relying on new information, on innovations, on things that are coming up next. And I think by limiting people into not do this and do not do that, you're limiting their imagination as well. So if I were to start this journey from the get-go, I would rely more on myself than on other people, because it's very easy to trial and error. That's the best way to go.
Yeah.
And if you can avoid those errors, that's great. But don't be very strict with what you do. Try to be creative. That's my advice here.
Okay. So, kind of time for couple more questions. Not a lot of time, but you mentioned machine learning, and you actually have some great YouTube as far as tutorials on introduction to machine learning and different concepts there as well. Utilizing Python for machine learning, how are we enabling that a little bit better? How do those two kind of fit together?
I think that Python is a very minimalistic language. It's very cut to the chase. You only specify the most basic things and then you move on. With artificial intelligence, it's almost like the opposite. Everything consists of long formulas. It's not complicated formulas. It's not complicated math, but there's just a lot of it, and it's sequential very often. So what Python does is it gives you the easiest syntax to use when you do machine learning. So processes like gradient descent, you can summarize them into a single command, which is amazing. I just posted a video about inference, which sounds very complicated, predicting, loading a pre-trained neural network, getting it, exposing it to an image it has never seen before and getting it to predict it. It sounds complicated, but within 30 minutes, you can do all of this and you can understand it very, very well if you're a beginner. So it sounds complicated until you see how the code actually looks like. And if somebody explains it to you step by step, in simple language, without any fancy terms, I think that everybody can understand it. It's not as intimidating when you understand how simple it is. Because people are afraid, I think that people are afraid of machine learning because they type it, they see the first article, which is a very sophisticated, very academic, language-oriented kind of an article, and then they freak out. They say, I'm not smart enough, I cannot do it. But in the end of the day, it's very simple math. As long as you remember what process comes first and why you do this process, it's so easy to do. And I wouldn't use a language like C++ for that.
No, no,
It wants
no.
every little detail. It wants to know everything. Python is much more ambiguous on that term. It takes care of a lot of the usual details you need to provide to other languages. And I think this is one of the biggest benefits of Python is the ability to do machine learning almost in plain English, I would say.
So you can take some of those multi-step type of machine learning types of models and methods, and then be able to reproduce them using simple language in Python is what you'll be able to do.
Absolutely. To me, it looks very often like plain English. Sometimes you had a colon, but when you use indentations instead of tags and instead of semicolons and instead of usual things we see in a language, it saves time and it helps you understand the code better visually.
Yep.
In my opinion, at least.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we've actually are out of time, but this is a great. I mean, it was joy to have you on, be able to and talk about these complex things very rationally, very simply, so even I could understand. So I want to thank you for being part of this.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for watching the channel.
They can find you on YouTube at Python Simplified. You mentioned Discord. I don't know if you know how people you want people to reach out, but I know you have your channel on YouTube, Python Simplified. I recommend people check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely come over. We have a really nice community there. They will help you with whichever information you need. We cover topics like GUI, graphic user interfaces. We cover artificial intelligence, parallel computing. We cover web scraping, bots. We're creating bots. So if any of these fields are interesting, definitely check it out.
And hopefully I'll see you at one of our conferences and helping out our community in business forecasting and predictive analytics sometime. And we can kind of work together and you can help out our community sometime at a conference in the future, maybe.
Absolutely. I'm in. Sign me in.
Okay, we got a predictive analytics conference coming up in New Orleans in April. Don't tempt me.
Okay, we'll talk.
Okay. It's great having you. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
As I said, that was just a fun interview to be able to do. I think it was great, and there was a lot of information in there too. Very simple that we could very grasp and build upon. Hopefully, what you've gotten from today's tutorial, today's podcast, is a challenge that you're going to go out and you're going to start doing some of these things on your own. You're going to take that risk, that fear you're going to overcome, and be able to start actually doing some coding on your own. What I'd recommend, take these fundamental steps, take a fundamental understanding of Python, language, what it can do. I invite you, check out Mariya's YouTube channel. She's got a great tutorials on that. There's other resources out there as well of just understanding Python language and just some of the simplistics of it and what it can do. Next, look at the fundamental understanding of machine learning, predictive analytics concepts, and some of the key terms so you understand that when you're doing some of the coding and you're trying to build some simple types of structure. My book, great resource. That's exactly what I'm doing in it. I'm taking predictive analytics concepts, machine learning, simplifying it, some of the key terms, so then you can utilize other resources to do things. Nicholas Vanderpoot, he's got a couple great books on this subject that talks about machine learning, and it actually provides some code you can use to be able to do some of those things as well. And there's a whole online resources out there available as well. Next, experiment with some of those packages. Learn what packages are available in Python. Experiment with some of those packages. Get your hands dirty. Trial and error is by far the best way you can do things. Dig in, get your hands dirty. Start with a simple few codes to say hello world, but then do some fundamental k-means. Learn what a k-means is. Learn what you're trying to do. Download a data set. And then do just a simple k-means type of cluster analysis or a decision tree. Learn the fundamentals of what goes into a decision tree, what's the structure, what's the key terms of it, and then download the Titanic data set and then do a simple analysis, do a decision tree on the probability if you were a 55-year-old male in first class, what's the odds that you're going to survive the Titanic? Tell me what the answer is. And then finally continue to grow. As with any new skill, the more you practice, the better you're going to become. Practice with different algorithms. Practice with different data sets. Try different things to better understand and utilize the community to continue to learn and grow as well. The biggest obstacle you're going to have is your fear. Overcome it. To be able to challenge yourself to start getting into new ways you can forecast, new ways you can discover information and insights through data science and predictive analytics and Python or some other types of open source software out there. So with that, I'm going back to see if I can learn any new jokes. I challenge you to expand your skills as well. Your fear is the only obstacle, so you got this. My name is Eric Wilson. This is IBF On Demand. Find me at eric@ibf.org. If you got questions or comments, I'd love to hear back from you what's happening in your journey. I love hearing those types of feedback saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. Find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. We do have a software provider for this, Arkiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. It's got a lot of great resources, a lot of great tools involved with it as well. Check them out at Arkiva. Check out IBF as well. And I did mention we do have a conference coming up. It's a predictive analytics conference. Don't be scared by the term. It's open for all levels. Literally all levels are actively participant in this conference. It's going to be from 26th through the 28th in New Orleans. I hope you can check out that conference. You come down for that one. It's a Predictive Analytics Conference. I said one of our fastest growing, most trending conferences we have this year. We're back in New Orleans again, April 26th through 28th. Check it out at ibf.org. Well, one skill that I learned that I'm still practicing today, I think one of the most important skills that I have, don't forget, wash your hands.